Hi everyone and welcome to Beyond Tomorrow, a new series from the New Zealand Herald in partnership with MYOB, where we tackle the unprecedented business environment affecting thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises across New Zealand as the world battles to slow the spread of the novel coronavirus. I'm Will Trafford and every day I'm joined by Ingrid Cronin-Knight, MYOB's country manager. Hey Ingrid.
G'day, Will. Super excited that we've had some clarity now about when businesses can open. And, we go out of lockdown on the 27th. And so that means that from the 28th, Tuesday next week onwards, we can not necessarily open the front door, but we can open the back door and get on with some of our forms of business. And really today's focus is about how we keep our people safe through that process.
Yeah, big news indeed. And to speak about the big news, in fact, we've got someone really, helpful in this sort of sphere, Craig McDonald, founder and director of All About People. He's also a WorkSafe Safe Plus assessor. Thanks so much for joining us, Craig.
No, you're welcome. Glad to help.
Right, well, today, as Ingrid sort of gave us a precursor there, we are talking about the really practical steps of preparing your workplace for level 3, given we now know New Zealand will be returning to level 3 next week. Craig, this must be good news. Judith Collins called it lockdown with KFC. That's probably a bit unfair. There's Macca's as well, right?
Yes, there is. We've got Macca's next to us, but not KFC, so...
Talk us through the general rules then of level 3, if you can, sort of from your perspective.
As businesses will be aware, looking at the COVID-19 website, it should be contactless going forward. As part of your introduction, it's making sure that the staff are aware of processes. There should be some new processes in place. The thing that we need to remember is that we are all in this together. It's affecting everybody in New Zealand, every business in New Zealand. And also that employees who haven't been at work for the last 3.5, coming up to 4.5 weeks, will be concerned about things like, do they have a job going forward, financial issues at home, that sort of thing. So bundling all of that up, it's making sure that businesses have some good processes in place. They're communicating really well with staff. That communication should be reasonably open and honest, and also business owners, they've still got a business to run, so it's making sure that when they communicate with staff, they work with them and engage with their staff to get solutions on board to help them with some of the changes going forward.
I guess a lot of businesses haven't really planned for this, right? I mean, particularly small businesses without sort of specific health and safety people and that kind of thing.
No, some do, a lot don't, and you're absolutely right. So as an example, we've had about 4 or 5 clients ring us this morning in a bit of a mad panic, thinking if we go back on Thursday, we haven't got anything in place to help manage going out to client sites, working with our staff and what have you. So in the last 3.5 weeks, we've been running a lot of online meetings and webinars with clients, just helping them to prepare resources. But there's still a lot there, I think, that have just hunkered down, and they've probably popped their head above the parapet this week, and like I said at the start, under a little bit of a mad panic. So yes, they do need to make sure they're prepared, and I think given the Prime Minister or the government's given us at about another 2 working days or 4 calendar days, it's a good opportunity to get that stuff in place.
I wonder if you can give us an idea of sort of how you make that plan then, obviously, in terms of getting businesses rebooted, if you like, and making sure your staff are safe.
A really good starting point is the alert level document that the government released. So the one that's got the alert level 4, 3, 2, 1, and it's got the different requirements and conditions in there. Where I would start if I was a business is make sure that they've got the right knowledge. So there's so much stuff popping up on LinkedIn, Facebook, and some of the information's incorrect or not valid anymore. So make sure that you're well informed and you're getting the information from the source, which is the government, Ministry of Health, and around business support and what have you, the IRD and work and income. So they've got some really good information and resources.
Yeah, Ingrid, I guess there's a sort of an accreditation process about even being allowed to operate, right, for level 3?
At the basis of each site or premise that you operate You need to develop a site-specific plan and publish that so it's available so your customers can see it, that your employees can see it, and if you're with unions, that's critical as well. In that plan, you need to make sure that you're keeping the consideration social distancing of your people, that you've got the hygiene, which, for many businesses, that's about having access to more sanitizer and the frequency of cleaning that happens. But you also do need to consider things like, are you servicing the aged care kind of sector or vulnerable people? And so if you are targeting a market there, then you need to consider around how you're interacting with that and what you're doing to keep your people safe. The biggest thing that I think about health and safety is that culture beats strategy any day. And so what I think is really important is that you talk with your people on day one and outline the plan and the rules, and so they're really clear about it, but put it in the context around everyone's health and well-being is just critical and vital for us. And no one wants the sickness going through their business. No one wants death of family members on their heads. Is that this is about keeping our people safe and our clients safe. And so we're putting these in to make sure that we can continue to operate, we can get some money coming in the doors, and help our financial well-being, as well as ensuring that all people are safe through the process.
Craig, I guess one of the big things is sort of restarting production lines and stuff like that. Maybe a bit of an advantage with the government saying you can get into the businesses a little bit earlier, but we don't want you trading as such. Just get in there and prepare these businesses. What does that sort of involve if you've got a production line, or maybe if you're a plumber that's going into other people's houses, that kind of thing?
So partly in line with what Ingrid said as well, it's making sure that you've got some of those risks identified and managed. So with a production line, it could be something like making sure all your pre-start checks are done, because I imagine that there'll be a few businesses out there that sort of they would have gone through a closed down process. Make sure that plant and equipment is safe to use going forward. Make sure that, like the government talked about, the first day back at work for schools, for example, they would like to see it as a teacher-only day. So if businesses take the same approach, make sure that with their staff they have those conversations, talk about the changed procedures, talk about making sure that they've got all their risks identified and managed. Things, as Ingrid said, what is their client base? If you're an electrician and you go out and you service aged care facilities, for example, so what plans do you need to have in place to manage that? What do you need to communicate with your clients to give them reassurance that you're on top of things? What gear do you need for your staff so that they can be safe with themselves and with others? And they keep reinforcing too, but the basic hygiene needs, have you got stuff for washing hands, keeping clean, PPE, that sort of thing. So it's just making sure you've got all of that up and running and your gear checked and ready to go for next week.
What are some of the legal requirements, I guess, then that you as an employer might have for employees? Because obviously, whilst we've had the lockdown, so many businesses have been thinking about cash flow. They've been thinking about, the employee subsidy and all this kind of stuff. What obligations do you have to keep your employees safe, I guess, over this time?
The health and safety legislation and regulations is focused on PCBUs or employers, making sure that their people are safe and anybody else that they come into contact with is safe as well, through any of the work that they carry out. So Ingrid talked about compliance and culture before. So WorkSafe have had a big shift away from pushing compliance to pushing culture and behaviours within the workplace. Again, we've heard some dialogue online and just through conversations with some businesses, and one of the first questions they sometimes ask is, what do we need to do to comply in the new environment going forward? And I think WorkSafe would agree with me in that what they should be focusing on is looking at processes, looking at risk, managing their risk, making sure they're communicating with their staff, communicating with their clients if they've got a client base, making sure, when I talk about processes, they've got stuff in place like safety plans to manage the risk, they've got the ability to contact trace and so on. So if you look at the culture, the behaviours, and you mix in a bit of process as well, what most businesses will find is that they automatically end up complying.
Would you consider sort of, there's so much talk at the moment in the healthcare sector around PPE. Is that something that businesses should be considering, I guess, if you've got employees working quite closely together?
So again, I think it all comes down to risk. It all comes down to the type of industry that people are working in. When you read the guidelines about PPE and COVID-19, they talk about if you're working with at-risk people, hypothetically, you've got somebody in your work team that might be a little bit older, might be have some health issues that might mean they're compromised, for example. So one of the first things an organisation should do is, should those people be at work in the first place? But if, for whatever reason, they are, in that situation, yes, I would have PPE available for people to wear. The Prime Minister's been talking a lot about the bubble and the personal bubble, and that just growing a little bit bigger. So again, depending on the industry, depending on the employer, it might be a mixture of PPE. It could be a mix combined with good hygiene practices. It could be combined with making bubbles small in the workplace, so breaking up shifts into teams, having different start-finish times, smokos, lunch times at different times, so that people don't cross-contaminate too much in the workplace.
Look, I think it's not going to be the same as before lockdown. I think that you'll find that there'll be more people that want to work from home now. They've found the sort of joy and balance of it. And so you also need to consider, if you do have people working from home, are they in suitable circumstances? You don't want them to come back into the workplace if they do and then have OOS or other issues because they haven't had adequate facilities. But I do think there'll be more people that will choose to embrace that. And if you can then have the balance of shifts, then that's useful. The other thing I think is quite useful, and people have been doing this while they've been on lockdown, is having more frequent check-ins with their teams. And so if you think about day one, it might be useful not only to have the briefing, but also have the reflection sessions where you get back at the end of the day and say, how do we do on it today? Or the check-ins with the different shifts that you might have around that.
Yeah, Craig, just a question on the sort of employee perspective. What if an employee is going into the workplace and thinking, hold on, we're moving too fast. This is unsafe.
So I think that's where it's really, really important that the employer engages with them before they start. Regardless of how much an employer might engage, I suspect there's going to still be employees, for whatever reason, they're going to be anxious about coming to work. They're going to be and have those fears and potentially not want to turn up on day one. So I think with the employers, it's just making sure when they have that engagement to start with, that they have the conversations with their employees, that they talk about how they feel coming back, etc. And they need to have some, I'd call it, say, a backup plan or plan B of how they're going to manage that if they're not going to turn up at work. So I've seen a range of solutions ranging from an HR practice and performance management point of view, that if you're not going to turn up and there's no valid reason for you not turning up, then that's going to be a performance management issue. And then I've seen that go right through to another way of employers or bosses, managers talking with their staff, and there's been they're talking about having staggered starts and so on. But I think coming back to my original comment was just make sure you have those really good, strong conversations with your staff to start with. And if you think anyone is a little bit concerned about coming back, you might take that offline and have that conversation with them.
And I think that that's really important, and people won't just be experiencing anxiety about coming back, because they'll be thinking it about protecting their bubble and making sure their bubble is safe. I think they'll also be concerned about their financial well-being. There'll be a number of elements to it, and so I think that when employers check in with employees, you be checking with your people, and hopefully you've been doing that anyway through lockdown, but it's really just to get a sense around people's well-being and how they're travelling, not just in relation to the anxiety about coming, or the potential anxiety about coming back into the office.
Yeah, I wonder if, from your perspective, Craig, what are the sort of three concerns that you have about employees and employers going back into manufacturing environments, retail environments, all these kind of environments from next Tuesday?
Three concerns. I think one concern would be not being prepared. So not having processes in place, not having information to communicate with their staff. Another thing is not identifying and managing the risks. So things like you might have immunocompromised people coming back into the workplace and you haven't actually sat down and thought about who they might be and how you're going to manage that. And the third thing I think is once they're at work, how you're going to manage what was normal behaviour, say 5 or 6 weeks ago, is now no longer the right way to work. So things like not gathering in the smoko room, not all sitting around the table, 5 people around a small table having lunch. So we've got a bit of social and physical distancing and so on. So it'll be people coming to terms with that.
Really, I think what you need to do is actually look at, can you actually eliminate contact in any way? And we know that you've got to do contact with customers and looking at those processes, but can you minimize activity? And so could you change the way a particular process was done, or the layout of that particular process? And your people sometimes great resource for figuring out how some of this could be solved. Obviously, you need to isolate where possible, and so for some people that might mean they've got to put up barriers that they otherwise didn't have to. And so those are some choices there. And then your admin team and how administration is working. I think that you might find that their desks actually and the positioning of them actually breach the 2-meter rule. So some people might need to work from home, or you have shifts, or you need to actually relay out the office to allow that physical space that's required to work our way through this and keep your people safe.
Yeah, presumably, Craig, you have an obligation as an employer to reach out to your employee base before you invite them back and check that none of them have been exposed to someone who may have been exposed to COVID-19 or have been treated for COVID-19, right?
You do. So it comes back to making sure that you've got that safe workplace, or you're providing a safe workplace. So whether it's through a health declaration, whether it's through an online call, whether it's when they get, you've had that conversation before they come back, and make sure that people understand that they shouldn't be coming into work or meeting or getting in close contact with others if they're not feeling well. So again, it's having some stronger processes around that than what they've had in the past. I come back to some examples. So clients ringing up last week and today wanting documents and talking about how to do health declarations for their staff, because clients asking them, what is the health and well-being status of the people that are coming onto site? Can you guarantee that they're well? So it's getting those staff to fill out those declarations, having them on file, being able to provide them to the client if needed.
And what do you think about the requirement on contact tracing? We spoke a brief amount of that in the past, but in terms of an employer's obligations around contact tracing, the work from a workplace, but then how far does that extend into their team, and then what happens when they leave the work environment?
You could go to the ends of the earth to contact trace. One of the solutions we've been looking at with a few of our clients is just setting up a simple form on either Google Forms or Microsoft Office 365. So that can be a simple link on your smartphone, for example, and we've got about 4 questions in there. So date, time, name of the person that you spoke to, where did you do it, and their contact phone number, and then just hit update or send. And for the majority of organisations or tradies, for example, it could be just the client that they've been to a couple of houses that day to do some electrical work. If it's going into a workplace that's manufacturing, for example, it's keeping it simple. Like they've got some form of sign-in at the front desk, whether it's a piece of paper or an online login. But it's just remembering that hygiene is paramount with that, and you need to wipe down surfaces, keyboards, etc. if you've got multiple people using them. But I think as far as contact tracing is concerned, yes, it is really, really important, but just keep it simple, get the minimum information and do it in a way that works for your business.
Hey, Craig, I'm wondering if you have some advice for employers and employees perhaps who are a little bit concerned about walking back into the office next Tuesday.
It's making sure that employers catch up with their employees before they come back to the office, whether it's a virtual office or whatever, or back in the workplace in the physical workspace. So catch up with them this week to make sure that the scene is set and the expectations are there on how it's going to work next week. Also, that would help, having some structure and planning around that would reduce some level of anxiety. When they get back to the office next week, it's making sure that, similar to things to what the government said today around going back into the workplace this week, for example, to make sure that stock's been sorted, that the workplace is ready to kick into gear next week, making sure that teachers, for example, can go back into their workplace to prepare for classes next week. So some of that preparation is and communication is just really important. And then we've also touched on making sure that there's a review as we go forward. So people have been back to work the first day. How's it gone? They've been back to work for the first week. How's it gone? Should we do anything differently? What's gone really, really well? So how can we build on that and make it improve going forward and so on?
I think the one thing we haven't touched on is for our leaders to recommend that they need to do the things that fill their buckets up as well. Like when everyone's depending on you, you've got a cash flow crisis, you're learning all these new things you've got to juggle. It's really important that you also take care of yourself and you do the things that keep you well. And that's different for everyone, but making sure that you take that time is important.
You're right. So the poor old boss, manager, supervisor, they're dealing with everybody else's problems, getting them back to work, sorting out rosters, making sure they've got equipment at home to work safely, etc. And often they put themselves last. So I think there's a saying along the lines of you've got to look after yourself before you can look after others. So it's making sure you get a good balance on that. Places that you can go for help on that. The government's been publishing a few links. So I think there's an allright.org.nz. There's some good mental health advice there. There's also the New Zealand Mental Health Foundation. They have some excellent resources for businesses and employees and so on. Other than that, if your organisation or company's got an EAP program, access that. There's no shame in it. I've done it myself several times with past employers. And I've also worked for employers putting those programs in place. And all I can say is that if you need help, find somewhere to go and get it or see your GP.
And in combination that, we had the wonderful Olivia Storm when we did look at the mental wellbeing of business owners. So you could have a look at our episode there, and she gave some practical tips about what you could do.
All right, Ingrid Cronin-Knight, MYOB's country manager, and Craig McDonald, founder and director of All About People. He's also a WorkSafe Safe Plus assessor. Thanks so much for the really helpful advice. Remember, we want your questions too. Email them through to video@nzherald.co.nz. Until next time, I'm Will Trafford. Stay home, stay safe, at least for another week. Bye for now.